Okay, now I'm going to go through how to convert a photo that we've taken and turn that into a black and white image that is suitable for screen printing. The first step I've done is that I've imported my photo into Lightroom. Once you've imported your photo into Lightroom, press D on the keyboard to switch from the library module to the develop module. So I'm going to press D and that will switch us to the develop module. What I want to do with the develop module is take my picture and I want to convert this to be as close to the final contrast that I want to print as I can possibly get. So the first step I'm going to do is to convert this from a color image to a black and white image. And then I'm going to use these sliders to make the main contents of my image as close to the contrast that I want to achieve in my final image. The first thing I notice about my image is that the shadows are quite dark and that there is very little detail in them. So I'm going to boost my shadows so that I can reveal some of the detail that's hidden within them. I'm going to drop my highlights so that I can bring the detail out of the highlights as well. And then I'm going to use my whites, blacks, clarity and contrast to bring the detail and make it a bit more dramatic than it currently is. So I want to bring out quite a bit more white than that. I'm going to push that up to about 50 and bring my blacks down around -1/4. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of extra clarity, about 25 as well, and then use my contrast to just give that image a bit more drama than it currently has, like so. You can compare the original, like so. So I noticed that there's not enough detail in this leaf here, so I'll use green to bring out some of that detail, and I'll use an adjustment brush here to just brush in a little bit more exposure. I'm going to feather it somewhat and not quite have a third flow, because then I can build up the colour. Still not bright enough, we can raise it up like that. And so I can use this brush I've made to just bring out some of the extra detail within the image. So I don't want to make the eyes look like that, so I'll delete that. The last thing I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to use my sharpening to just make the image a bit more clear. I'll stick to around 20 and around 40 luminance and color, and then use my sharpening to make the image a bit more detailed. Because we're going to be converting this to black and white, I'm not so much worried about noise because that's largely going to disappear. Oh, excuse me. Right, once we've done that, I'm going to take this image and open it in Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to do that by either right-clicking and choosing Edit in Photoshop, or by pressing Command E on the keyboard. And then Photoshop should automatically open the image. So the first thing I want to do is, if you look at the picture, you'll notice that there's, in the main image section, there's two large areas. We have the horns, which are quite white and bright, and the main image here. So I'm going to clear cut out the horns using the pen tool which can be reached by pressing P on the keyboard or by clicking on the pen tool. And I'm going to use the pen tool to clear cut out the horns perfectly, because I want to separate them from the background, because we will convert them to screen printable black and white separately. I always start my anchors by choosing a square corner that doesn't have any curve to it. So I'll make my initial anchor point. Now I'm going to look up my object and try and see the point where a path will intersect adjacent, like so. And just drag it into place. Yep. You'll notice that it doesn't quite match up here. I can click on this space to add another anchor point and press up on the keyboard to just nudge it perfectly aligned with that shape. You'll see that when I hover over things with the pen tool, that the icon down beside it will change. When I'm here, you'll see a line, which means join on to the end there. When I hover over any point on the path, you'll see a plus, which means add an anchor point. And when I hover over anchor points within that path, you'll see a minus, which will take away that anchor point when I click it. When there's a star next to the pen tool, it means that it will place an entirely new anchor point that's not attached to the current path. And when there is no icon, it just means it's going to add another anchor point to the currently being edited path. The idea is to click and to drag your path into place. If you just click, it will just make an anchor point on that very spot, which is not what we want. We want to drag the handle to make the path match our object as closely as possible, like so. If I zoom in, you see that it doesn't quite line up with the horns, so I'll add an anchor point here and nudge it back into place using the arrow keys, and do the same further up the path to make it fit as closely as I can. The less points you add to your path, the smoother the curve will be. So we want to use as few paths as possible. Sometimes it's going to do crazy things, like that. But if I hold the command key, it will bring up the previously selected selection tool down here. Currently it's the white one, which I can use to drag anchor points into their proper position. And I can also use that to drag handles that are already on the document. The reason I use the pen tool to make my paths is that a vector line is a mathematical object rather than a pixel selection. If I use this instead of a pixel selection, I'm going to get a path that can be reused later on without a degradation in quality. When dealing in Photoshop, we want to ensure that we use techniques that maintain quality as much as possible, because it's a raster program, which means it uses pixels, and so anytime we can avoid using lossy raster graphics, we should, which is a process called non-destructive editing, or a non-destructive workflow. I'm pretty happy with how that lines up to the horns. So when you hold down Alt and you hover over a curved path you've made, you'll see that little angle appear. That means when I click that, it's going to delete the anchor off that side, and then when I place my new path, it will create a sharp corner rather than a curved bezier. And I can drag that into place to align to my path. Now, because I've gone off the document, I'm imagining how it's working, but it's probably not quite right. So I can just come back in and edit it back into place. An anchor point there, and another one here, and another one there. Oops. Now if you look at the paths palette, you'll see I've got a work path here. I'm going to want to save that as a path, which I'm going to call horns. And when I place my next anchor point, you can see the star, which means that it's going to start a new path, but it's going to remain within the part here. I want to keep it within the same path, but be a separate path. So I'll drag that, match it as close as I can. It's pretty darn close. Lop that off, and then match my curve to the horns. Remember, it's quite easy to adjust your path back into place by using the arrow keys and by adding extra anchor points as necessary. If you have a Windows computer, remember that you can just substitute the command key for control most of the time. I don't think it matters which platform you decide to use as long as you have the appropriate software. They use the same file formats and it doesn't really make a heck of a lot of difference. Unless you like to argue about it, in which case that's fun. Close off my path. I'm going to come back in and make sure that it matches as close as I can. Yep, I'm happy with that. The absolute beauty of using vector paths for doing this is once you've made the path and it's completed, to make that into a selection and turn it into a layer mask, I hold Command, and when I hover over the thumbnail of the path, you'll see a square with a marching ants icon. When I click with my left mouse button, it will create a selection that exactly matches the vector path. And then to copy that from the background layer here and paste it into a new layer, I can just click New Layer. And I'll just drag that onto New Layer. Copy. And then press this icon here with a black circle inside a white rectangle, which is Add Layer Mask. And then our selection will be turned into a layer mask here. You'll see our horns have been cut out. I'm going to double click the background layer to make it an editable layer. I'm going to call it Lady, or Viking Lady, for a bit more drama. Press enter. I'm going to call my background copy Horns. Now I want to name my layers as semantically as possible, which means naming them in a way that describes what they are. It's important that you name your layers appropriately so that when you come back to your files in a few months' time that you know what each layer means and you're not trying to use guesswork. So the next step is I'm going to use the threshold adjustment, and I can use that to turn my image into a completely black and white bitmap like this. The quality of the final will be much better than this. This is just a preview, and when we zoom in you'll see so. I'm just going to choose a setting that looks good. I quite like it about there. Now I can use my arrow keys to just perfectly adjust it. It's trying to find a middle ground between shadow and drama and detail. I might choose about 55. And when I press OK, you'll see that this has been turned into black and white dots. I'm going to turn that off, turn the horns layer on, and use the same process. Image, adjustments, threshold, and I can use this to adjust how that looks. In fact, I could even edit these separately. If I press Command J on the keyboard, it will duplicate the horns layer. I'll call this one horns right, and I'll call this one horns left. Now I'm going to edit my layer mask using the brush tool to make each side left or right. The brush settings I'm going to use is 100% opacity, 100% flow, 100% hardness, and black is the color. The white areas in the layer mask are areas that are visible, so by painting out this side, like so, make sure that the layer mask is selected. I'll paint that side out, and you'll see we've got one there, and I'll paint this side out here. And now I can come back in with my image selected and not the layer mask. Go image, adjustments, threshold, and then I can find something that looks dramatic. I'm going to choose about there. It's okay. Repeat the process to the right side. Pick something with a similar level of detail. About there. Click OK. And now we have a black and white image. The last step I'm going to do is I'm going to run this through a halftone screen. The way we do that, the reason we do that first is that some of these are extremely small dots which won't actually print out through a screen print, since that is literally 2 pixels. So I'm going to use the halftone screen to convert these into a section of dots. Now the way we do that is you'll see that currently bitmap here is grayed out, so we need to begin by stepping out all of the detail from the image. So I'll click grayscale, which will convert this image to grayscale and take away all of the color detail. I'll click don't merge, discard color information if it asks, obviously it is, click discard, go mode, and we want to drop the channels to 8 bits because bitmap is still grayed out. I'll click 8 bits a channel, and the last step is select bitmap, ... I'll accept flattening of layers. I'm going to keep 300 pixels an inch, but instead of using diffusion dither, I'm going to select halftone screen, ... Typically in Photoshop, when it has a ... it means that it's going to bring up another dialog box with more options. Click OK. Now we have a frequency of lines an inch. This relates to the frequency of the fibers in the actual physical screen. So we want the frequency to be about half of what the frequency of the actual fibers is. So if you have a frequency of 70 fibers per inch, we'd probably select 35 lines an inch for frequency. I actually want to accentuate the dots that the halftone screen dialog produces. So I'm going to select 20 lines per inch and choose a round shape. And when I click OK, see that it is converted into dots. And that's it. When you print that out, you will be able to pass that through a screen. And that's it. Press Command S when you're done. Return to Lightroom. I'm also going to bring the image back into the RGB color space before exporting it as a JPEG. Press Command S again. And there you have it.